Welcome back, chess fans, to the Knight Gambit TV, your ultimate home for deep strategic breakdowns and masterclass chess analysis. Today, we are diving into an absolute masterpiece of modern chess positional warfare from the 2026 titled Tuesday Blitz Tournament. In the white pieces, we have none other than the Indian superstar Grandmaster, Praggnanandhaa, sitting at a staggering 3,302 Blitz rating. Facing him in the black pieces is the incredibly formidable Grandmaster Steinberg, rated at 3045. What we are about to witness is a profound clash of styles. Praggnanandhaa opens with a hypermodern King's Indian attack setup, inviting black to occupy the center, while Steinberg counters with a rock-solid double fianchetto system. If you want to understand how a world-class Grandmaster turns a tiny space advantage into a suffocating, victorious middle game squeeze, you are in the right place. Grab your favorite drink, lock in your focus, and let's look at this game move by move, deeply and passionately. Let's smash through the opening. Part 1. The subtle art of hypermodern opening warfare, moves 1 to 6. 1. Knight f3. White begins not by seizing the exact center with a pawn, but by controlling it with a piece. The king's knight springs to f3, immediately eyeing the critical d4 and e5 squares. This is the cornerstone of hypermodern chess theory. Rather than occupying the center immediately with pawns, which can become targets, white keeps their options completely open. It prevents black from playing an immediate e5, forcing an asymmetrical response, and serves as the perfect, flexible prelude to the ready or King's Indian attack. 1d5. Steinberg accepts the structural challenge. Since white did not occupy the center, black boldly takes space in the exact middle of the board with the d-pawn. This move secures central territory, opens a pathway for the light-squared bishop, and says, "If you will not take the center, I gladly will." It is a principled, classical reply to a hypermodern opening choice. 2. g3. Praggnanandhaa signals his clear strategic intent, the King's Indian attack. Instead of engaging in a direct pawn fight with a move like 2.d4, white prepares to fianchetto the light-squared bishop. Placed on g2, this piece will cut across the longest dark diagonal of the board, h1, a8, applying indirect but immense pressure down the road on black's central pawns. It is a patient, deeply positional approach favored by players who prefer long-term strategic squeezing over immediate tactical skirmishes. 2. g6. Steinberg decides to fight fire with fire, choosing the double fianchetto system. By copying white's kingside fianchetto intention, black ensures that their own king will be safely guarded by a dark-squared bishop, while also contesting the critical central dark squares. This setup creates a highly symmetrical structural tension, where both sides are playing behind a wall of castling shields, waiting for the opponent to create the first structural imbalance. 3. c4. The first major punch of the game. Praggnanandhaa strikes at the base of black's central d5 pawn. This is the classic hypermodern hook. White is using a flank pawn to chip away at black's proud central pawn. The message is clear. Your d5 pawn looks impressive, but can you actually maintain it without giving up something else? It immediately shifts the game from a quiet mirror match into an intense tactical and structural puzzle. 3. c6. Steinberg declines to capture on c4, which would surrender his central footprint. Instead, he plays the solid, rock-like c6, reinforcing the d5 pawn. This creates a powerful pawn triangle, c6, d5, e6 eventually, reminiscent of the Slav defense. Black is willing to accept a slightly passive, defensive posture in exchange for an unbreakable, solid wall in the center of the board that blunts the future g2 bishop's gaze. 4. Queen a4. A brilliant, highly sophisticated Grandmaster nuance. Praggnanandhaa brings the queen out early, not to launch a premature checkmate attack, but to create a subtle tactical pin along the a4, e8 diagonal. By putting the queen on a4, the c6 pawn is temporarily pinned to the king. Black can no longer easily capture back with the c-pawn if white takes on d5, creating a quiet but annoying psychological and positional headache for Steinberg. 4. d takes c4. Steinberg blinks first under the psychological pressure of the pinned c-pawn and decides to liquidate the tension. He captures on c4. While this surrenders his proud pawn center, it frees his pieces from the awkward pin and aims to force white's queen to move again, hoping to waste white's precious opening tempos later by chasing the exposed queen around the board. Black. 5. Bishop g7. Steinberg completes his kingside fianchetto development. The dark-squared bishop lands on g7, standing as a fierce guardian of the black king's future home. From this square, the bishop breathes down the long diagonal, eyeing the queen side and waiting for the center to open up so it can exert its full power. It is a move that combines absolute safety with latent, coiled spring aggression. 6. Bishop g2. Praggnanandhaa completes his own kingside fianchetto. The white bishop is now perfectly placed on g2. The symmetry is beautiful, yet tense. Both sides have developed their bishops to secure their kings, but white retains the crucial first move advantage and a slightly freer hand in controlling how the center will eventually open up. Part 2. Mobilizing the armies and mapping the queenside. Move 6. 12. 6. Knight f6. Steinberg brings out his king's knight to its most natural developing square. The knight on f6 protects the d5 square, prepares for short castling, and keeps a watchful eye on any potential e4 pushes from white. It is a quiet, necessary developing move that gets black one step closer to absolute king safety. 7. Castle. Praggnanandhaa castles without hesitation. The white king tucks himself safely behind a wall of 3 healthy pawns and a defensive bishop on g2. The rook on f1 is now activated, ready to shift to the d or e files depending on how the central pawn structures evolve. White has completed the first phase of the game flawlessly. Safety is achieved, and the stage is set for a middle game plan. 7. Castle. Steinberg mirrors white's king's safety. Both kings are now safely castled on the king's side. The opening phase is winding down, and the real chess begins. The pawn structures are nearly identical, but the subtle placements of the queenside pieces will now dictate who wins the positional war. 8. Knight c3. Praggnanandhaa develops his queen's knight to its most active square. From c3, the knight exerts strong influence over the d5 and e4 squares. It acts as a gatekeeper, preventing black from easily advancing in the center while preparing for white's own space-grabbing pawns to push forward when the time is right. 8. Knight bd7. Steinberg develops his knight to d7 rather than c6. This is an important positional choice. On c6, the knight would block the c-pawn and get in the way of its defensive duties. On d7, the knight supports a future e7, e5, or c6, c5 counterstrike, keeping the long dark diagonal completely open for the g7 bishop. It is a flexible move that aims for a patient, counterattacking middle game. 9. d4. Having safely castled and developed his pieces, Praggnanandhaa finally claims his share of the central stakes. The d-pawn advances 2 squares, securing space, opening lines for his dark-squared bishop on c1, and establishing a firm foothold in the center. The hypermodern phase is over. White is now playing with concrete, classical space dominance. 9. Knight b6. Steinberg immediately challenges the white queen, gaining a vital tempo. The knight jumps from d7 to b6, kicking the proud white queen from her comfortable perch on c4. This move also clears the path for black's light-squared bishop and aims to establish a foothold on the queenside, forcing Praggnanandhaa to declare where his queen will live for the rest of the middle game. 10. Queen d3. Praggnanandhaa drops the queen back to a safe, highly functional outpost on d3. From here, the queen remains centrally active, guarding the d4 pawn, supporting the e4 push, and keeping a watchful eye on both sides of the board. It is a retreat, but a highly aggressive one that sets up an impending space storm in the center. 10a5. An ambitious flank advance by Steinberg. Black pushes the a-pawn, seeking to gain space on the queen side and creating a potential anchor square on a4 for the knight or a future rook lift. It signals that black is not content to simply sit back and defend. They want to create concrete counterplay on the queen side before white can crush them in the center. 11. h3. A deep, prophylactic, preventative move by Praggnanandhaa. By pushing the h-pawn 1 square, white takes away the critical g4 square from black's pieces. This ensures that when white later develops their dark-squared bishop to e3 or f4, black cannot annoyingly harass it with knight g4 or bishop g4. It is the hallmark of a high-level player, eliminating the opponent's options before they even materialize. 11. Bishop e6. Steinberg develops his final minor piece, bringing the light-squared bishop to an active diagonal. From e6, the bishop eyes the weak c4 square, threatening an annoying tactical check or layout via bishop c4, which would skewer the white queen and rook. It forces white to react immediately to this developing threat. 12. Rook d1. Praggnanandhaa easily slides his rook to the d-file, stepping off the dangerous a2, g8 diagonal, and sidestepping any potential bishop c4 tricks. Simultaneously, the rook aligns itself perfectly behind the d4 pawn, preparing to support a massive central breakthrough with d4, d5, or e4, e5. The tension is palpable as the middle game officially begins. Part 3. The midfield skirmish and the positional squeeze. Moves 12. 19. 12. Queen c8. Steinberg forms a classic battery. By placing the queen on c8, aligned behind the e6, bishop, black targets the slightly exposed h3 pawn. It forces white to pay attention to their king's safety and hints at future counterplay on the dark squares of the king's side. 13. King h2. Praggnanandhaa answers the challenge calmly. The king steps up to h2, manually defending the h3 pawn. This is completely safe because black lacks enough attacking pieces nearby to exploit the king's slightly forward position. Praggnanandhaa's position remains a tough nut to crack. 13. Rook d8. Steinberg repositions his rook to the open d-file, creating an X-ray glare right through white's d4, pawn, and d3 queen. This is a classic defensive and offensive alignment. If white ever opens the center carelessly, black's rook will instantly become a monster, holding the central files hostage. 14. e4. The central explosion arrives. Praggnanandhaa proudly pushes his e-pawn 2 squares, building a classic, dominant pawn center with d4 and e4. White now controls the vital real estate of the board, cramping black's pieces and daring Steinberg to find a flaw in this massive wall of pawns. 14. a4. Steinberg continues his queenside expansion plan. By driving the a-pawn further to a4, he secures more space on the left flank and prepares to create structural cracks in white's queenside layout, hoping to distract white from their mounting central assault. 15. Queen c2. Praggnanandhaa smoothly tucks his queen away onto c2. This gets her out of the uncomfortable X-ray line of the black d8 rook while maintaining structural protection over the c3 knight and keeping an eye on the queenside geography. 15. Knight e8. A profound positional retreat by Steinberg. The knight moves backward to e8 to clear the path for the g7 bishop, allowing it to exert full force down the long diagonal, while also preparing to redeploy the knight to a better defensive or offensive outpost via c7 or d6. 16. Bishop f4. Praggnanandhaa develops his dark-squared bishop to an active, aggressive post on f4. From here, it exerts massive pressure down the h2, b8 diagonal, clamping down on black's queenside activities and controlling key jumping squares for the middle game transition. 16. Knight c7. Steinberg continues his knight rerouting plan. Moving to c7, the knight eyes the b5 and d5 squares, looking to establish a secure defensive anchor block to blunt white's mounting center. 17. Rook ac1. Praggnanandhaa activates his final piece, bringing the a1 rook to the c-file. White's pieces are now completely mobilized and harmonized. The rooks occupy the central d and c files, the bishops cut across sweeping diagonals, and the center is ripe for a breakthrough. 17. a3. Steinberg strikes a tactical spark on the queenside. By forcing the pawn deep into a3, he tries to shatter white's neat pawn chain. If white captures, their queenside pawns become isolated targets. 18. b3. Praggnanandhaa refuses to take the bait. He calmly slides the b-pawn to b3, locking down the queenside structure. Black's a3 pawn is now a wedge, but it is also completely blocked and isolated from immediate help, turning it into a potential long-term weakness. 18. Knight a6. Steinberg brings his knight back into the game via the rim. The knight on a6 looks to jump into the juicy b4 square, trying to create tactical annoyance and disrupt the coordination of White's perfectly placed forces. 19. Queen e2. Praggnanandhaa repositions his queen once more, adjusting to the changing board. On e2, the queen stays safe from any nb4 jumps while lending extra structural support to the e4 pawn, preparing for the decisive central breakthrough. 19. Knight b4. Steinberg achieves his tactical goal, planting a powerful knight outpost on the b4 square. The knight looks menacing, eyeing the c2 and a2 squares, trying to throw a wrench into White's positional gears. Part 4. The breakthrough and the central collapse. Moves 20 to 35. 20. d5. Boom. Praggnanandhaa unleashes the long-awaited central breakthrough. Pushing the d-pawn to d5 cracks open the center of the board. It attacks the e6 bishop, creates massive tactical tension, and marks the definitive turning point where positional maneuvering gives way to sharp, calculating tactical warfare. 20. Bishop d7. Steinberg is forced to pull his light-squared bishop back to d7. The proud bishop is reduced to a defensive role, as White's advanced pawns begin to severely restrict the mobility of Black's pieces. 21. d6. A brilliant thrust. Praggnanandhaa doesn't just want a big center. He wants a passed pawn. Pushing to d6 creates a dangerous wedge right in the heart of Black's position, splitting their forces in half and restricting their defensive coordination. 21. E takes d6. Steinberg is practically forced to chop the dangerous d6 pawn down before it suffocates his entire position. 22. Bishop takes d6. Praggnanandhaa recaptures with the bishop, placing a towering monster on d6. This bishop completely dominates the board, pinning Black's pieces, cutting off communication, and standing as a testament to White's superior opening strategy. 22. c5. Steinberg tries to fight back by closing down lines and creating space for his own pieces, but this advance leaves structural holes in his camp that an elite grandmaster like Praggnanandhaa will exploit ruthlessly. 23. Rook d2. Praggnanandhaa doubles down on the d-file, preparing his rooks to claim absolute ownership of the center. 23. Rook a5. Steinberg attempts an awkward, defensive rook lift to protect his vulnerable queenside pawns, but the piece looks out of place against White's flowing harmony. 24. Queen e3. The White queen moves to an active attacking square, piling pressure onto the weak c5 pawn. 24. Bishop e6. Steinberg shifts his bishop again, desperately searching for active counterplay or a stable defensive wall. 25. Rook cd1. Praggnanandhaa completes his total domination of the d-file. Both rooks are stacked, exerting terrifying pressure right down the middle of the board. 25. Knight d7. Steinberg tries to bring his knight back to defend the king, but the position is already unraveling under White's relentless squeeze. 26. e5. Praggnanandhaa locks down the center, shutting out the g7 bishop completely and securing a massive space advantage. 26. h6. A defensive airhole for the Black king, but it does little to alleviate the tactical storm brewing in the center. 27. Knight e4. The White knight joins the party, jumping toward the weak c5 square and threatening to tear open Black's queenside. 27. Rook e8. Steinberg tries to create a counterpin down the e-file, hoping for a tactical miracle. 28. Queen c3. Praggnanandhaa repositions his queen, setting up tactical threats against the exposed Black rooks and minor pieces. 28. b6. Steinberg tries to patch up his weak pawns, but the structural damage is done. 29. Knight f6 check. Tactical fireworks. Praggnanandhaa sacrifices a knight on f6 to shatter Black's king's safety once and for all. 29. Knight takes f6. Steinberg must accept the sacrifice to avoid instant ruin. 30. E takes f6. The pawn recaptures, instantly turning into a lethal tactical weapon that traps the g7 bishop and threatens checkmate patterns. 30. Bishop h8. The Black bishop is forced into an embarrassing, claustrophobic retreat on h8, completely out of the game. 31. Bishop e7. Praggnanandhaa plants a lethal bishop wedge on e7, cutting off the black rooks and suffocating the black position. 31. Knight c6. Steinberg tries a desperate counterattack with the knight, looking to eliminate the monster e7 bishop. 32. Knight e5. Praggnanandhaa brings another piece into the attack with devastating force. 32. Knight takes e7. Steinberg eliminates the e7 bishop, but it opens up a floodgate of tactical disasters. 33. F takes e7. The white pawn steps closer to promotion, creating an unstoppable threat. 33. Queen c7. Steinberg tries to pin the white knight, desperately looking for an exit strategy. 34. Rook d8. A stunning, decisive rook intrusion. Praggnanandhaa invades the back rank, threatening immediate checkmate or massive material gain. 34. Queen takes e7. Steinberg captures the advanced pawn, but his back rank is completely shattered. 35. Rook takes e8 check. Praggnanandhaa liquidates into a completely winning endgame, trading off the defensive pieces. Part 5. The ruthless endgame cleanup, moves 35. 57. 35. Queen takes e8. Steinberg recaptures, but his king is completely exposed and helpless. 36. Queen e3. The white queen returns to a central attacking post, threatening the weak kingside pawns. 36. Bishop takes e5. Steinberg is forced to trade off his remaining pieces, entering a losing queen and rook endgame. 37. Queen takes e5. Praggnanandhaa recaptures, dominating the entire board with his beautifully coordinated queen and rook. 37. Rook a7. Steinberg tries to bring his rook back to defend the open lines, but it is too little, too late. 38. Queen f6. The white queen moves into an incredibly menacing position, threatening lethal backrank checks. 38. Rook e7. Steinberg desperately tries to cover the back rank. 39. Rook d6. Praggnanandhaa attacks the weak b6 pawn, continuing the relentless grinding technique. 39. b5. Steinberg tries to run with his pawns, but it only creates new weaknesses. 40. Bishop c6. The white bishop returns to deliver a final, crushing blow, pinning the black queen and winning material. 40. Queen f8. The black queen is forced into a completely passive, humiliated defensive square. 41. Bishop takes b5. Praggnanandhaa calmly cleans up a free pawn, increasing his material advantage. 41. Bishop c8. Steinberg moves his bishop, but the game is practically over. 42. Bishop c4. Praggnanandhaa sets up a lethal checkmate threat against the g6 pawn. 42. Bishop e6. Steinberg tries to block the threat with his bishop. 43. Bishop takes e6. Praggnanandhaa cleanly trades off the defensive bishop. 43. Rook takes e6. Steinberg recaptures, hoping for a drawing chance in the pure queen endgame. 44. Rook takes e6. Praggnanandhaa ruthlessly liquidates the rooks, eliminating any chance of tactical counterplay. 44. F takes e6. Black recaptures, but their pawn structure is completely destroyed. 45. Queen takes g6 check. Praggnanandhaa begins a lethal series of checks, cleaning up black's remaining pawns with clinical precision. 45. King h8. The black king cowers in the corner. 46. King g2. A beautiful king move by Praggnanandhaa, ensuring his own safety before delivering the final blows. 46. Queen a8 check. Steinberg delivers a desperate, spiteful check. 47. King g1. The white king steps back into absolute safety. 47. Queen d5. Steinberg tries to centralize his queen, but it is helpless. 48. Queen h6 check. Another pawn falls. Praggnanandhaa's material advantage is now completely overwhelming. 48. King g8. The black king runs, but there is nowhere to hide. 49. Queen g6 check. Praggnanandhaa continues his flawless, clinical checking sequence. 49. King f8. The king moves again. 50. Queen f6 check, driving the black king into an even worse position. 50. King e8. The king steps up, trying to escape the checks. 51. Queen h8 check. Another precise check from the Grandmaster. 51. King d7. The king wanders into the open board. 52. Queen g7 check. Praggnanandhaa keeps absolute control, never giving Steinberg even a sliver of hope for a perpetual check. 52. King c6. The black king hides behind its own pawns. 53. Queen a7. The white queen switches targets, eyeing the advanced a3 pawn. 53. Queen d1 check. A final, desperate check by Steinberg. 54. King g2. The white king calmly steps out of harm's way. 54. Queen d5 check. Another check. 55. King h2. The white king is completely safe on h2. 55. Queen d2. Steinberg tries to attack the f2 pawn, looking for a final trick. 56. Queen a8 check. Praggnanandhaa delivers a devastating check that will force the trade of queens or win the remaining black pawns. 56. King c7. The king steps aside. 57. Queen a7 check. A final, beautiful check. With the black king completely exposed, his pawns falling like dominoes, and the white passed pawns ready to march down the board, Steinberg realized the futility of resistance and resigned. A masterful strategic squeeze by Praggnanandhaa. 1-0.